The clink of a fork against bone china was a sound Clara Miller knew better than her own heartbeat. It was the rhythm of her life, a metronome marking time in a world she served but could never join. Here, at the Empyrean, Chicago's temple of aged beef and whispered deals, she was a ghost in a starched black apron. She navigated the labyrinth of linen-draped tables with a practiced invisibility, her mind a fortress of memories in a life that demanded she forget who she was. Then he arrived. Alistair Finch was not a man who entered a room. He was a weather system who displaced the air within it. A titan of private equity, he was a king in a bespoke suit, his presence sucking the warmth from the crystal chandeliers. Tonight, he was with his protégé, the handsome and unnervingly smooth Marcus Thorne, and 2 foreign investors. And tonight, Finch's laughter was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at her. "Perfect recall," he boomed, the sound ricocheting off the dark wood paneling, a cruel echo of a conversation she was never meant to hear. He gestured dismissively at her with a half-eaten shrimp. "Let's ask the help. Tell me, sweetheart, what was the vintage of the Cabernet I had 3 months ago?" The table chuckled. Marcus Thorne offered a pitying smile that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. The room held its breath, waiting for her humiliation. But Clara didn't flinch. She simply met Alistair Finch's predatory gaze, and her next words would not just answer his question. They would detonate a bomb in the center of his world, proving that the most valuable asset in the room wasn't on any balance sheet he owned. The scent of seared steak, beeswax, and old money was the perfume of the Empyrean. For Clara, it was the smell of purgatory. Each night, she donned the uniform and became a cipher, identified only by the number pinned to her vest, 27. Her real identity, the one that mattered, was buried under 6 years of grief and carefully constructed anonymity. Her shift began in the cathedral hush of the late afternoon. The dining room was a sea of white, each table an altar awaiting its wealthy supplicants. Her station near the service bar was a model of precision, every glass polished to a blinding sheen, every fork aligned with geometric perfection. Her manager, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose posture was as unbending as her standards, performed the nightly inspection. "Miller, table 4. "The Finches," she said, her voice a low hum of anxiety. "Mr. Finch will want the 82 Margot. Let it breathe for precisely 60 minutes in the decanter, not 59, not 61. And for God's sake, don't make eye contact unless he speaks to you." "Yes, Mrs. Gable." 60 minutes, Clara replied, her voice a placid stream of professional deference. Internally, her mind was already working. "Chateau Margaux, 1982. Bordeaux. Premier Grand Cru Classé. Predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon. Growing season, warm, dry. Harvest, early. Notes of cassis, truffle, cedar. Peak drinking window closing, but for a palate like Finch's, it's about the status, not the subtleties. It was an involuntary reflex, a ghost of a former life. This torrent of information was how she kept the essential part of herself, the part that remembered everything, from turning to dust. Clara was not just a waitress. She was a living archive, a casualty of a brilliant life that had been stolen from her. 6 years ago, she was not Clara Miller, server. She was Clara Miller, daughter of David Miller, the founder of Miller Analytics, a boutique data analysis firm so successful it had begun to challenge the giants. Her father was her hero, a gentle genius who saw the world in patterns and probabilities, and she had inherited his gift, magnified. She was a mnemonist. From the age of 4, she could recall, with perfect fidelity, nearly every sight, sound, and word she had ever experienced. It wasn't a party trick. It was the architecture of her mind. She was her father's secret weapon, able to recall years of market data lines of code and contractual clauses verbatim. Then, in the space of one horrific month, it was all incinerated, a catastrophic hostile takeover, orchestrated with surgical malice. An algorithm her father had designed was stolen, twisted, and used to trigger a flash crash in a niche market, framing him for market manipulation. The evidence was digital, ephemeral, and planted with diabolical skill. There were federal investigators, a brutal trial by media, and financial ruin. Her father, a man whose integrity was his bedrock, was destroyed. He died of a massive heart attack 3 weeks before he was to be indicted, leaving a 20-year-old Clara utterly alone, his name a synonym for disgrace. The man who had smiled at them over dinner, her father's brilliant and ambitious protégé, the one who had discovered the malicious code, was Marcus Thorne. He had offered his condolences at the funeral, his eyes glistening with a sympathy she now knew was the pinnacle of predatory art. A month later, Thorne used the chaos to orchestrate a buyout of the firm's gutted assets, rolling them into a new division at Alastair Finch's global empire, Finch Equity Group. Now she was here. Her name was just Clara. Her most complex daily task was remembering who preferred their water with gas and who without. The irony was a physical weight in her chest. She, who could recite the closing price of every stock on the S&P 500 for the last decade, was now invisible. "Miller, focus!" Mrs. Gable's voice was a sharp crack in the quiet. "The Finch party is seated. Table 4. You're on." Clara's stomach clenched into a cold knot. Table 4 was the worst, the large, semicircular booth in the corner, a throne room for the restaurant's most powerful patrons. And the Finch party meant Marcus Thorne. She saw him several times a year, and each time was a fresh stab of a wound that would not heal. He never recognized her. Why would he? To him, she was just part of the furniture, the forgotten daughter of the man he had destroyed. She took a steadying breath, the air thick with the smell of other people's success. It was just another table, just another man. She spent the next hour in a state of hyper-aware numbness. She decanted the Margot, her hands as steady as a surgeon's. She polished silverware until her own reflection became a distorted, faceless spectre. She was a ghost, and ghosts are good at being unseen. At 8:15 p.m., the energy in the room coalesced around table 4. Alastair Finch had arrived. He didn't walk, he strode, a shark parting the waters. He was flanked by Marcus Thorne, looking sleek and proprietary, a German industrialist named Klaus Richter, and a Japanese tech billionaire, Kenji Tanaka. They were the architects of something big. Their conversation was a low, intense murmur of numbers and acronyms. Mrs. Gable caught Clara's eye, her expression a mixture of terror and warning. "Now, Miller. Not one mistake." Clara smoothed her apron, lifted her silver tray, and walked toward the heart of her own private darkness. The moment she approached the table, the air grew thick, charged with power. Finch was scrolling through a tablet, his brow furrowed in annoyance. He didn't look up. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Clara, and I will be your server tonight. May I begin with some water for the table?" Marcus Thorne finally glanced at her, his eyes sliding over her with the blank disinterest of a man looking at a lamppost. "Still for the table, Alastair." Finch grunted an affirmative without looking up. "And get the menus. We know what we want." Clara retreated, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She procured the water and the menus, moving with the fluid, self-effacing grace her job demanded. As she poured the water, their conversation resumed. They made no effort to be discreet. The concept that the server might understand, let alone matter, was alien to them. They were discussing a deal, a corporate takeover of a biomedical firm. Project Nightingale. The conversation was a dense thicket of financial jargon, but for Clara, it was as clear as a child's storybook. "The Q3 projections for Etheria Labs are soft," Richter said in his clipped, German-accented English. "But their patent on the gene sequencing technology is the real prize. If we can leverage the debt load, we can force a buyout under market value." "The key is the timeline," Tanaka added, his English precise. "We must finalize the tender offer before their Phase 2 trial results are published. The data I have seen suggests a breakthrough. If that news hits, their valuation will triple overnight." Finch finally looked up from his tablet, his eyes a piercing Arctic blue. "It's sloppy, Marcus. The debt is spread across too many instruments. Trying to consolidate it quietly will trip alarms at the SEC. I want a clean kill, not a protracted battle." Marcus leaned in, his voice a confident purr. "Alistair, I've already modeled it. It's a ghost algorithm, a variation on the one I developed years ago. It spreads the buy orders across dozens of dark pools, microtransactions that are too small to trigger reporting requirements. By the time their board sees us coming, we'll already own a controlling interest. It's untraceable, flawless." Clara's hand, holding the heavy water pitcher, did not tremble. But inside her, a glacier of 6 years of suppressed rage began to crack. A ghost algorithm, untraceable. The exact phrases from the articles she had read, the ones that had convicted her father in the court of public opinion. He was using the same weapon, her father's weapon, stolen and turned against the world. Again and again, she kept her face a placid mask. She was a waitress. She was there to take their order. "Are you gentlemen ready to order?" Finch was annoyed by the interruption. He stabbed a finger at the menu. "The bone-in ribeye. Pittsburgh rare. If the center is not cold, I'm sending it back." The others gave their orders. Richter wanted the Wiener Schnitzel. Tanaka, the miso-glazed black cod. Marcus, the filet mignon. Medium. Clara recited the order back flawlessly, including Finch's threat, which she softened to, "The ribeye, prepared Pittsburgh style. Understood." For the next hour, she was a spectre at their feast. She moved in and out of their bubble of power, refilling wine glasses, clearing plates, all while they meticulously plotted their corporate assassination in plain sight. They were insulated by their wealth, protected by the profound arrogance of believing that the woman serving their food was a functional deaf-mute. They were finalizing the details of the algorithm. Finch was still skeptical. "I need assurances, Marcus. The last time a strategy this aggressive was used, it blew up in that fellow's face. What was his name? The data guy from Chicago, years back." "Miller," Marcus said, the name rolling off his tongue with casual disdain. "David Miller. And he wasn't aggressive, Alistair. He was reckless. A fine mind, but he got greedy and flew too close to the sun. My algorithm is a different beast entirely. It's been perfected. The Miller case was a lesson in what not to do." Clara froze behind the service station, a stack of clean plates in her hands. The casual, dismissive way he uttered her father's name, the lie he told so smoothly, was like a physical blow. The plates rattled softly. She willed her hands to be still. He wasn't just a thief. He was a grave robber, dancing on the reputation of the man he'd murdered in all but name. She had to get out. She had to breathe. She murmured an excuse to a fellow server and retreated to the alcove by the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a job anymore. She wasn't just a ghost. She was a witness with a perfect memory. The main courses had been cleared. The men at table 4 were nursing glasses of scotch, the triumphant glow of a sealed deal settling over them. The conversation had turned to the markets, to past victories. Finch, expansive and dominant, was holding court. "The market is a story," he declared, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You just have to know how to read it. It's all about remembering the patterns. For instance, the Etheria situation reminds me of the Argentum mining play in— what was it, Marcus? 2011? When we cornered the silver futures market." Marcus frowned, his smooth facade cracking for a second. "Argentum. Yes. October of 11. We leveraged their debt against the commodities plunge. A brilliant move. What was the exact closing price the day before we initiated the squeeze?" Finch pressed, a glint in his eye. It was a test, a casual display of his power to demand total recall from his subordinates. "The 24th of October. Marcus hesitated. 41. No, 41.57, I believe." "You believe?" Finch scoffed. "Belief is for church, son. In my world, you know." He sighed, frustrated by the imprecision. He hated it. He scanned the table, a king searching for a competent courtier. His gaze fell on Clara, who was silently refilling his water glass. A cruel, dismissive amusement flickered across his face. "What about you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've been hovering all night. You must have a good memory for a waitress, remembering all those orders." He then asked the question that would change everything. "You have perfect recall?" he boomed. "Let's ask the help. Tell me, sweetheart, what was the vintage of the Cabernet I had 3 months ago?" The table fell silent. This was sport for him, a cat toying with a mouse for the amusement of his guests. Marcus Thorne looked away, a flicker of embarrassment or perhaps annoyance on his face. Clara placed the water pitcher on her tray. She stood up to her full height, which wasn't much, but in that moment she felt colossal. The years of practiced deference fell away from her like a shroud. Her expression, which had been a carefully constructed mask of pleasant neutrality, sharpened into something intensely focused, analytical, and cold. She looked Alistair Finch directly in the eye. "You didn't have Cabernet 3 months ago, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the expectant silence. "You were here with your legal team on a Tuesday night. You drank Macallan 25. Neat. And you ordered the Dover sole, deboned at the table." A heavy, dangerous silence descended. Finch's condescending smile evaporated. He stared at her, genuinely seeing her for the first time. He was not a man who was often corrected, especially not by a servant. "As for your other question," Clara continued, her voice dropping slightly, drawing them all in. "Marcus is incorrect. The closing price of Argentum mining on October 24th, 2011 was $42.17. He's thinking of the 25th, when it dropped to $41.57 after your initial shorts were revealed in the pre-market." Marcus Thorne's face went slack with shock, then flushed a dark, ugly red. That's ridiculous. How could you possibly know that?" "I remember it," Clara said simply. She then turned her gaze fully on Marcus, and for the first time in 6 years, she let him see the ghost of David Miller's daughter in her eyes. "Just as I remember the ghost algorithm you're planning to use for Project Nightingale." The air at the table crackled, the tension suddenly unbearable. Finch leaned forward, his massive frame seeming to shrink as he focused his entire being on her. Richter and Tanaka exchanged bewildered, alarmed glances. "It's a variation of the Chronos sequence," Clara said, her voice now a cold, surgical instrument. "Designed by my father, David Miller. It uses predictive modeling based on circadian rhythms of international markets to hide trades in the decimal dust of currency fluctuations. You stole it from his home server on the night of June 12th, 2014. 2 days before you discovered the fabricated code that framed him. Marcus leaped to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. Alistair, this is insane. She's clearly unstable, a disgruntled nobody. Security. But Finch didn't move. He didn't blink. He was staring at Clara, his mind a machine built for calculation, running at lightning speed. He was connecting dots he hadn't even known existed. "You're David Miller's girl," he whispered, a look of dawning horror on his face. "I am," Clara said, her voice ringing with the power of a truth held silent for 6 long years. She looked past Finch, her eyes locking with Marcus Thorne's. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The predator had just realized the trap was not for the rabbit, but for him. "You told Mr. Finch that my father's case was a lesson in what not to do," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "You're wrong. For you, it was a dress rehearsal. You're using the same strategy, the same stolen code, and you've made the same mistake. You underestimated the witness." She took a half step back from the table, her role as accuser complete. The invisible waitress had just rendered the most powerful men in the room completely and utterly speechless. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Thorne," she said, the slightest, most dangerous hint of a smile touching her lips. "It is a flawless algorithm. I know because I remember every single line of the original source code, and I know the kill switch my father built into it. The one you were never smart enough to find." She paused, letting the magnitude of her words land like a physical blow. "Now," she said, her voice returning to a neutral, professional tone as she picked up her tray. "Would any of you gentlemen care for dessert? I believe your appetites may have changed." Alistair Finch didn't speak. He just stared at her, the cogs of his formidable mind churning. He had been assessed, analyzed, and summarily dismantled. He had laughed at a waitress, and she had responded by revealing a rot at the very heart of his empire. He slowly raised one hand and pointed a single, trembling finger at her. "You," he rasped, his voice a ghost of its usual boom. "My car. Outside. 10 minutes." He threw his napkin onto his half-eaten steak. "Marcus, you're fired. Gentlemen, I believe this dinner is over." Without another word, he stood and strode out of the restaurant, leaving his shell-shocked associates, a fired protégé, and a stunned silence in his wake. Clara stood by the table for a moment, the epicenter of the explosion. Then, with a steady hand, she began to clear the plates. The alley behind the Empyrean was a slash of darkness, smelling of damp cardboard and discarded luxury. Clara's shift had ended the moment Finch had walked out. Mrs. Gable, pale and trembling, had simply nodded toward the door. "Go on, child. Get out of here." Clara hadn't argued. The thought of serving another meal, of being anyone but herself, was suddenly impossible. She walked out into the cool Chicago night, her meager belongings in a tote bag. A gleaming black Maybach was parked at the mouth of the alley, its engine a low, threatening rumble. She had half expected it. As she approached, the rear door swung open. "Get in!" It was a command, not an invitation. Clara slid onto the buttery leather seat. The door closed with a silent, definitive thud, sealing them in a capsule of wealth and silence. Alistair Finch sat opposite her, the city lights painting fleeting stripes across a face carved from granite. He looked older than he had in the restaurant, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. The car pulled silently into the river of traffic along Wacker Drive. "Start from the beginning," Finch said. It wasn't the same question as before. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a grim, urgent necessity. "And don't leave out a single detail." For the next hour, as the city slid past the tinted windows, Clara talked. She unspooled 6 years of memory with perfect, painful clarity. She described her father's work, the brilliance of his code, the pride in his eyes. She recounted the arrival of Marcus Thorne, the charming protégé who quickly became like a son to her father. She detailed the weeks leading up to the crash, the late nights Marcus spent at their home, his unusual interest in the server architecture, the strange glitches in the system her father had dismissed as benign. She recited, verbatim, conversations she had overheard, recalled the precise dates and times of key events, and described the lines of code she had seen on her father's monitor the night before it was all wiped. It was an avalanche of information, a torrent of data that would have overwhelmed any normal person. Finch listened without interruption. He was a man who processed the world through data, and Clara was giving him the purest data set he had ever encountered. He had built his empire on calculated risks, on understanding the men he did business with, and he was beginning to understand that Marcus Thorne, the man he had mentored, the man he had trusted with the keys to his kingdom, was a viper he had nurtured at his own hearth. "He told me Miller got greedy," Finch said, his voice a low rumble of disgust, more to himself than to her. "He said he had to clean up the mess. He sold me a story, and I bought it. I made him a senior partner." "He's a storyteller," Clara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It's his greatest skill. He tells you what you want to hear. He told my father he was a loyal friend. He told your partners they would be rich. He told you he was a brilliant protégé who could make you richer. And what is he telling himself?" Finch asked, his sharp eyes fixed on her. "That he's smarter than everyone," Clara replied instantly. "That he's earned everything he's ever stolen. That ghosts can't hurt him." Finch was silent for a long moment, watching the lights of the city reflect in her steady, unblinking eyes. He was a predator, and he was staring at a weapon the likes of which he had never conceived. He had been initially suspicious, wondering if this was some elaborate shakedown, but her story, in its crushing detail, had the undeniable ring of truth. More than that, it explained the nagging inconsistencies he had seen in Marcus for years, the deals that were a little too perfect, the solutions that were a little too easy. "This kill switch you mentioned," he said, his voice shifting into a purely transactional tone. "Is it real?" "It is," Clara confirmed. "My father was cautious. He built a back door into the core of the Kronos algorithm, a single line of code, hidden in a redundant data validation subroutine. If activated, it doesn't just stop the program. It reverses the last 24 hours of transactions and sends a complete, unencrypted log of all its activities to a designated secure server." "Whose server?" Finch asked, leaning forward, his fatigue replaced by a sudden, intense energy. "His," Clara said. "He wanted the proof sent to his own lawyer in case of a betrayal. The server address is coded into the kill switch. I remember the address. I remember the activation key." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Alistair Finch's face. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a shark that has just scented blood in the water. "He called your father reckless," Finch mused. "But he's the one who has been running for years with a gun pointed at his own head, and he never even knew it." He looked at Clara, and his expression shifted again. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed assessment. He was no longer looking at a waitress or a victim. He was looking at an asset, a solution. "I don't like being made a fool of, Miss Miller," he said. "Marcus Thorne didn't just betray your father. He has been using my capital, my infrastructure, my name, to run his own private war. He has exposed my entire company to catastrophic risk with this Etheria deal." "I'm aware," Clara said. This isn't about justice for you anymore, Finch stated, laying his cards on the table. This is about survival for me. I need to neutralize Marcus, and I need to do it before he burns my house down. Project Nightingale is already in motion. The algorithm is active. Then you need to stop it, Clara said. Stopping it isn't enough, Finch countered, his voice like gravel. That just makes him suspicious. I need to catch him. I need to gut him. I need proof that is ironclad and undeniable. He paused, his gaze pinning her to the leather seat. You are that proof. But your memory, as remarkable as it is just a story. I need the data log from that kill switch. He tapped a button on the armrest, and a sleek, encrypted laptop rose from a hidden compartment. He swiveled it to face her. I'm not offering you a job, Ms. Miller. I'm not your savior. I am a man with a very big, very expensive problem. You are the only person on Earth who can solve it. I am offering you a partnership, a temporary one. You will work with my cybersecurity team. You will give them the activation key and the server address. You will help us access that log. He named a number. It was a staggering sum, enough to live a life of quiet luxury forever. Clara looked at the laptop, then back at the man who, just hours before, had tried to humiliate her for sport. This was a deal with the devil. But this devil was offering her the one thing she craved more than money, more than safety. He was offering her a weapon to finish the war her father had lost. I don't want your money, Mr. Finch, she said quietly. Finch raised an eyebrow. No? Then what do you want? I want to be there when you do it, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But it was a whisper filled with steel. I want to see his face when he realizes he's been caught. And I want the public exoneration of David Miller. I want his name cleared, his legacy restored. That is my price. Finch studied her for a long, silent minute. He saw no fear, no hesitation. He saw 6 years of focused, ice-cold rage that had been waiting for a single spark. He had provided it. He extended a large, manicured hand. You have a deal, Ms. Miller. Welcome to the war room. Clara took his hand. It was not the hand of a rescuer, but of an ally, a co-conspirator. As their hands clasped, the deal was sealed, not in a boardroom, but in the silent, speeding cocoon of a billionaire's car, 2 predators united against a common enemy. The penthouse floor of Finch Tower was less an office and more a command center, a sterile expanse of glass and steel suspended 1,000 feet above the sleeping city. For the next 72 hours, it became Clara's world. Finch's cybersecurity team, a trio of pale, caffeine-fueled geniuses who looked barely old enough to vote, treated her with a mixture of awe and suspicion. They had been briefed by Finch. This young woman held a key, and their job was to help her turn it. The process was far from simple. Activating the kill switch was not like flipping a light switch. It was a delicate, high-stakes surgical procedure. The algorithm is designed to protect itself, explained a young man named Leo, his fingers flying across a keyboard, displaying cascading lines of code on a wall-sized monitor. It's nested inside the primary trading systems of Finch Equity. If we try a brute force entry, it will trigger a dead man's switch, wiping its own logs and quite possibly corrupting the entire trading platform. It's designed to look like a catastrophic system failure, Clara added, her eyes scanning the code on the screen. My father was paranoid. The wipe would be blamed on a hardware malfunction, not an attack. So, we need to send the activation key without the system realizing it's a command, Leo said, his voice a frayed whisper in the chilled, server-humming air of the war room. We need to disguise it. Make it look like background noise, routine data. This was the precipice. For 3 days and 3 nights, Clara had lived in this glass-walled cage, suspended 1,000 feet above Chicago, fueled by black coffee and the cold, crystalline fury that had sustained her for 6 years. Her memory, once a sanctuary of cherished moments with her father, had been transformed into an arsenal. She had spent hours dredging its depths, not for comfort, but for schematics, protocols, and the digital fingerprints of the 2 men who had shaped her life, one with love, the other with treachery. The cybersecurity team, Anya, Leo, and a silent, intense man named Raj, had initially treated her as a curiosity, a savant with a bizarre party trick. Now they looked at her with a kind of terrified reverence. She was not just recalling facts. She was channeling a ghost, reconstructing an entire digital consciousness from the echoes in her mind. "He used a port-knocking sequence," she said, her gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the wall of monitors, seeing a memory of her father's study, smelling the pipe tobacco and old books. "It's not just a password, it's a handshake, a series of connection attempts to specific, closed ports." A silent question asked, in a language only the server understands. The sequence itself unlocks a temporary, encrypted data channel. The activation key has to be sent through that channel, in that moment. Anya, the team lead, leaned forward, her face illuminated by the cascade of green text. "The sequence, Clara. Do you remember the sequence?" Clara closed her eyes, the simple act of shutting out the sterile present, plunging her back into the warm past. 4 ports. It was a private joke between us. His birthday, then mine. Port 8148, August 1st, 1948. A phantom ache bloomed in her chest. Then, Port 3211925, March 11th, 1995. The first attempt was a catastrophic failure. The moment they initiated the sequence, defensive subroutines flared on the screen like angry red hives. An alarm, silent but for the flashing text, screamed, "Unauthorized access attempt." "He's changed it," Leo breathed, frantically killing the connection. Thorne wasn't an idiot. He found the door and changed the lock. Alistair Finch's voice, filtered through an intercom, was a shard of ice. "Is this an exercise in nostalgia, or are we disarming a bomb? Report." "Thorne has wrapped the original protocol in a new encryption layer," Anya reported back, her voice tight with stress. "It's modern, aggressive. We try to knock, and it screams bloody murder to the whole system." Clara walked to the main monitor, the immense screen reflecting her own pale, exhausted face. She wasn't a hacker. She couldn't see the code the way they could. But she could see the man behind it. She had studied Marcus Thorne for years, first as a family friend, then as a murderer, and now as an adversary. She knew his vanity, his arrogance, his profound narcissistic need to prove he was better than his mentor. "He's theatrical," she murmured, her fingers tracing the patterns of the encrypted wrapper. "He thinks he's an artist, not a thief. He wouldn't just build a wall, he would sculpt it." She scanned the blocks of gibberish, her mind not processing the syntax, but the rhythm, the structure. "There," she said, her voice sharpening. She pointed to a section of the code. "The block sizes, 128 bits, then 64, then 128 again. And the character sets he's using for the randomization, they're weighted. The algorithm favors A, C, G, and T." Leo frowned, typing furiously. "Adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine, the building blocks of DNA. So what? It's a common trope." "It's not a trope. It's a signature," Clara insisted, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place with the force of a physical blow. "Project Nightingale, Etheria Labs, the company they're targeting. He told Finch their patent on a gene sequencing technique was the prize." Her eyes widened. He's not just using a DNA theme. He's using the target's patented gene sequence as the salt for the encryption key. He's hiding the lock inside the very thing he's trying to steal. The arrogance. It's breathtaking. The atmosphere in the room shifted from despair to a frantic, supercharged excitement. It was a stunning leap of intuition, born not from technical skill, but from a perfect memory of a dinner conversation and a deep psychological dissection of her enemy. Anya's team pulled the public data on Etheria's core patent. The gene sequence was there, a long, elegant string of letters. They integrated it into their attack vector. This time, when they initiated the port-knocking sequence, there were no alarms. There was only a profound, terrifying silence. And then, a single line of text appeared on the screen. Channel open, 60 seconds. "Now, Anya, now!" Clara urged, her heart hammering against her ribs. Anya's fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion as she typed the activation key Clara had recited to her, a string of characters that was not random, but a line from a Robert Frost poem her father used to read to her. "The woods are lovely, dark and deep." "Key sent," Anya whispered, leaning back as if she'd touched a live wire. "Channel closed." The 60 seconds of frantic action gave way to an eternity of silence. 1 minute passed, then 2. The screens showed nothing. The market was opening in London. The algorithm was still working, its invisible tendrils wrapping around Etheria Labs. "It failed," Leo said, his voice hollow with defeat. Finch's intercom remained ominously silent. Clara stared at the screen, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Had she been wrong? Had her memory, her one perfect weapon, finally failed her? Had she brought them all this way only to watch Marcus win again? And then, a new window bloomed in the center of the main monitor. It was not a system prompt or a log file. It was a simple black text box, like an old DOS prompt. A single line of text, written in a monospaced font she recognized from her father's ancient computer, blinked into existence. "Hello, Starling." Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was his name for her. A name no one else knew. It was a message from the ghost. A second line appeared beneath the first. "Reversal protocol initiated. Logs secured. Tell your mother I love her." A sob, sharp and painful, escaped Clara's lips. Her mother had died when she was 12. It was a nonsensical instruction, a fragment of a memory only she could possibly understand. It was her father's final, absolute proof of identity. The ghost in the machine had not just answered. It had reached out and touched her. On the other screens, chaos erupted. Thousands of microtransactions began to reverse simultaneously. The stealth acquisition of Etheria Labs was not just halting, it was unraveling, erasing itself from existence as if it had never happened. And on a secure Finch server, a data file began to download. A file 2.7 gigabytes in size. The complete, unencrypted, and utterly damning chronicle of Marcus Thorne's entire secret career. Finch's voice, when it finally came over the speaker, was no longer impatient or cold. It was filled with something else, something deeper. Awe. "He won't feel the reversal until the quarterly reports are audited in a month," he said softly. "By then the world will have ended for him. Ms. Miller, you have done more than deliver. You have resurrected a ghost to slay a monster. Now it's my turn to set the stage." The 2 weeks that followed were a strange, suspended purgatory. Finch had installed her in a palatial suite at the peninsula, a gilded cage with panoramic views of a city she no longer recognized. She was no longer Clara the waitress, nor was she Clara the avenger. She was a weapon in waiting. The silence was the hardest part. After the frantic intensity of the war room, the quiet luxury of the suite was deafening. Her perfect memory, no longer focused on a single objective, began to play tricks on her. She would hear her father's voice in the hum of the air conditioning, see Marcus Thorne's smug smile in the reflection of the polished marble. The ghost she had summoned was not so easily dismissed. On the evening before the end, Alistair Finch came to see her. He didn't knock. He simply let himself in with a keycard, finding her standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the river of headlights below. "Tomorrow," he said. It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow," she confirmed, not turning around. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 2,190 days, she replied, her voice flat. He came to stand beside her, a titan in a bespoke suit, looking out at the empire of glass and light he commanded. "I misjudged you in the restaurant," he said. It was the closest he would ever come to an apology. "I saw a uniform, not a person, a costly mistake." "You saw what I wanted you to see," she said. "Thorne made the same mistake. On a much grander scale," Finch mused. "He believed your father was a brilliant but flawed man. He never understood that David Miller's true genius wasn't in his code, but in his caution, in his love for you. That kill switch, it wasn't a back door for himself. It was a letter in a bottle he threw into the ocean, hoping one day his daughter would find it." Clara finally turned to look at him. "And what about you, Mr. Finch? What do you believe in?" A cold, mirthless smile touched his lips. "I believe in ledgers, Miss Miller. I believe that all accounts must be balanced. Thorne unbalanced my books. He introduced a catastrophic liability into my world and built it on a lie that I, in my arrogance, chose to believe. This isn't about justice for your father. It is about the ruthless restoration of order. My order." He was giving her the truth, a courtesy he likely extended to very few. He was not her savior. He was an apex predator, whose territory had been encroached upon by a lesser, more reckless carnivore. She was simply the elegant, perfect weapon he was using to restore the sanctity of his food chain. "My price remains the same," Clara stated, her voice unwavering. "His public exoneration. That is the centerpiece of the new ledger," Finch confirmed. "The story must be rewritten. David Miller, the tragic visionary. Marcus Thorne, the usurper. Finch Equity, the vigilant entity that uncovered the truth. It's a clean narrative. The market will appreciate it." He paused, his gaze intense. "Tomorrow you will not be watching on a screen. You will be in the adjoining room. I want you to be there. The ghost should be present for the exorcism." The final act took place, not in a courtroom, but in the heart of the beast. Finch's cavernous office on the penthouse floor. Marcus Thorne strode in at 10 a.m. sharp, radiating the easy confidence of a man who believed he was about to be lauded for the silent, brilliant acquisition of Etheria Labs. Clara watched from the attached conference room, separated by a pane of one-way glass. She was a spectre at the feast, just as she had been at the restaurant, but this time the table was about to be violently overturned. Finch was the picture of magnanimous calm. "Marcus, sit. A drink?" "A celebratory one, I hope," Marcus said, sinking into the soft leather of the visitor's chair. Nightingale was a flawless execution. Clean, quiet, untraceable. The board won't know what hit them until we own them outright. "Flawless," Finch agreed, his voice a silken purr. He didn't offer a drink. Instead, he slid a thick, bound document across the vast mahogany desk. "My legal team finished the final audit last night. I'd like you to review it." Marcus picked it up, a flicker of confusion on his face. He opened it. The first page was a simple title, The Kronos log, an audit of unauthorized trading activity, 2014 present. Clara watched as the blood drained from Marcus Thorne's face. His confident posture collapsed inward, as if his spine had dissolved. He flipped through the pages, his movements growing more frantic. He was seeing it all. Every ghost trade, every shell corporation, every siphoned dollar, every step of the Etheria takeover, laid out in excruciating, undeniable detail. This is impossible, he stammered, the document shaking in his hand. This data doesn't exist. It can't. Oh, but it does, Finch said, his voice dropping to a conversational, lethal tone. It seems David Miller was an even better coder than you gave him credit for. He built a black box into his engine, and it recorded everything. A masterpiece of execution, as you said. Marcus stared at Finch, his mind scrambling, the predator's brain searching for an escape that wasn't there. You can't prove any of this. It's just data. It could be fabricated. Ordinarily, perhaps, Finch conceded. He pressed a button on his desk. The wall behind him, a sheet of frosted glass, suddenly became clear, revealing the conference room beyond, revealing Clara. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression a calm, placid mask. She was no longer wearing a waitress's uniform, but a simple, dark dress. She was no longer number 27. She was the architect of his ruin. The sound Marcus made was not a word. It was a strangled gasp, the sound of a man's entire reality being ripped apart at the seams. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a dawning, soul-destroying horror. The ghost was real. The waitress, he breathed, the words barely audible. Finch stood, his shadow falling across the broken man in the chair. Her name, he said, his voice resonating with the finality of a death sentence, is Clara Miller. And you were wrong about one thing, Marcus. Her father's case wasn't a lesson. It was a prophecy. At that moment, the door to the office opened and Clara stepped through. She walked slowly, deliberately, until she stood directly in front of the desk, looking down at the man who had destroyed her family and forgotten her face. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice quiet, yet it filled the vast room. He flinched as if she had struck him. He couldn't look at her. He could only stare at the damning report on the desk, his world reduced to ink on paper. "You built your life on a ghost story," she continued, her voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a profound, weary finality. "You thought you had buried the past, but you forgot something. The past remembers." Two federal agents who had been waiting in an adjacent anteroom entered. It was over. As they gently but firmly pulled a catatonic Marcus Thorne to his feet, he finally looked up at Clara. In his eyes, she saw no hatred, no anger, only the blank, hollow terror of a man who had been so thoroughly outplayed that he could no longer comprehend the rules of the game. 3 months later, Clara stood not at a podium, but at her father's gravesite. The autumn leaves, gold and crimson, drifted down around the simple granite headstone that now read, David Miller, a visionary, a beloved father. The public exoneration had been swift and total. The press had devoured the story of the brilliant, wronged visionary and the treacherous protégé. The David Miller Foundation for Ethical Data Science, endowed with a fortune from a chastened Alistair Finch, was a reality. She had won. Every objective had been met. The ledger had been balanced. But as she stood there in the quiet cemetery, she felt no joy, only a vast, echoing emptiness. The rage that had fueled her for 6 years was gone, and she wasn't sure what was left in its place. "It's done, Dad," she whispered to the cold stone. They know the truth now. She waited, as if for an answer, but there was only the sigh of the wind through the oak trees. The ghost was gone. The voice in the machine was silent. For the first time since she was 20 years old, she was truly alone. And her memory, no longer a weapon, offered her 1,000 perfect, painful recollections of his laugh, his smile, the warmth of his hand. She stayed until the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass. Revenge, she realized, was a language spoken to the dead. It was a conversation with an echo. The real work, the work of living, was a language she had to learn all over again. She didn't see Alistair Finch again until the Foundation's first board meeting. He was, as promised, the chairman, but he had ceded all operational control to her. He watched her run the meeting with a cool, unnerving focus, his expression unreadable. Afterward, as the other board members filed out, he approached her. "The first grant proposals are promising," he commented. "They are," she agreed. "There are a lot of brilliant young minds out there who want to build, not break." He nodded, looking around the clean, modern office that was now hers. "You have a new life, Clara, a new lexicon. You are no longer defined by what was taken from you." "I'm not," she said, and for the first time she truly believed it. "But I am defined by what I remember." He raised an eyebrow. "A burden?" "No," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "An archive. A library. I just had to learn how to use the card catalogue." She looked out the window at the sprawling city. It was no longer a landscape of purgatory, but one of possibilities. She had walked into the Empyrean a ghost, trapped in the prison of a perfect memory. She had walked out its master. The memories of the past would always be there, sharp and clear, but they no longer owned her. They were simply the first chapter in a much longer story, one she was finally ready to write herself.